All right, good morning, everyone. This is Rebecca Allen again. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Good morning and welcome to the work group meeting for Chapter 849 of the 2020 Acts of Assembly. We're going to be recording this meeting, and that recording is in progress. This meeting is being conducted in a completely virtual environment, and as with our other meetings, I'm just going to review a couple of orders of procedure at the outset. So first, we ask that members of the work group please mute your lines when you are not speaking, as this reduces the amount of background noise on the call and the potential for audio feedback or reverb. We also ask that due to the virtual nature of this meeting that you please identify yourself each time you begin to speak so that we can accurately record the minutes of the meeting. For those attendees who are not members of the work group, you will not be able to mute or unmute yourselves. If you would like to bring something up to the attention of the work group members, please message me, Rebecca Allen, inside of WebEx through the chat feature, and I will get your line unmuted for you. When we get to the public comment period, if anyone has signed up to speak during the public comment period, I will mute and unmute those speakers accordingly. The names of the work group members, along with the organizations that they represent or agencies that they represent, are displayed on the screen. Lastly, if there's any votes that are going to be taken today, they will be roll call votes, again, because of the virtual nature of the meeting. And then I will be restating the names of members who make motions or seconds, if we happen to do votes. With that being said, I will go ahead and call the roll. So, Joellen Scheid.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm on.
All right, thank you. Tiffany Long.
I am here.
Jared Taylor. Oh, I see you are in our attendees list. 1 second, let me bump you up. Okay. You should have the ability to mute and unmute yourself now. Okay, excellent. Milam Lee.
I'm here.
I'm here. Eric Bodine. Okay. Michael Capps.
I'm here.
Barbara Allison Bryan.
I'm here.
Tim Farber.
I'm here.
Katie Page.
Hey, I'm here.
Douglas Gray, excuse me.
Here.
Jessica Waddell.
Here.
Chad Melton. And Kelly Cannon. Okay, I can see Ms. Cannon in the list. You should be able to mute and unmute yourself, Ms. Cannon.
Sorry about that. Good morning.
Good morning. All right, excellent. And then I also want to acknowledge that Tyler Cox and Mark Pratt are also joining us, as well as Joseph Humphreys in our attendees list. And then there's another call-in user, but if someone's just calling in, I can't see who it is. So I do want to make mention that we do have some attendees on the line as well. All right. Moving forward, the agenda for today, we're going to begin with our public comment period as we typically do. Then there will be a Block Health presentation on the use case for blockchain technology, and that will be spearheaded by Jared Taylor and Tiffany Long, followed by a presentation by the Office of Procurement and General Services, Michael Capps, on procurement by state agencies, followed by discussion of our next steps and any other business before the work group. As we have done in the past, there's our public comment period, and I will review how this works, so I will go ahead and say that I checked our registrations this morning. We do not have public comment, but just as a refresher, I'm going to review the procedures in case we have someone who wishes to offer public comment in the future. Whenever attendees register for this meeting, they are given the opportunity to sign up to speak on a topic. We finalized the list at 7:30 this morning. As I said, there's no one on the list, but pursuant to the Board of Health's public participation policy, any potential speaker would have a maximum of 2 minutes in which to speak. We would display a countdown timer on the screen, and the bell rings whenever that time has elapsed. And if the bell rings whenever a person is speaking, we do allow the speaker to finish that sentence. Then the speaker will be muted, and the name of the next speaker will be called. But as I mentioned we don't have any speakers today for our public comment period, so the public comment period is closed. And oh, Mark, you did indicate yes. Okay, sorry about that. 1 second, Mr. Pratt. I didn't see that in the registration this morning, but I will fix that real quick. Just give me 1 second. I will set up the timer for you. And then I'll get it shared on the screen. One moment. Okay, so everyone should see the timer on the screen. If you will give me 1 moment, I need to unmute Mr. Pratt, who is with CAQH. Okay, Mr. Pratt, can you test your audio for me?
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Okay, whenever you're ready, I will start the timer for you.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. And I thought I did check the box yesterday when I registered, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak briefly.
Of course.
I'm Mark Pratt with CAQH. We really appreciated the opportunity to present last time, and I don't want to overstay our welcome, but thought I'd take the 2 minutes in the public comment period just to follow up on a request to us made concurrent with our presentation last time around what other states are doing in this area. We did do some research and follow up, and I think it's generally consistent with the outline that we provided on your last call. We identified 5 states that have legislative or regulatory mandates for a state-managed PSV system. On the last call, Arkansas was referenced, and they were, in fact, the first state to create a state CVO over 20 years ago. So Arkansas is the oldest. As was indicated, it is for physicians only, and I think you also got some commentary that it's also on the expensive side for the purchasers of that information. According to our information, there are 4 other states that have legislative or regulatory mandates. And as I think we indicated, they are primarily focused in the Medicaid area. And I know, having participated in these calls, I don't recall speaking about your intentions with respect to Medicaid, but nonetheless, those 4 states are Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and Texas. Arizona, North Carolina, and Texas appear to be focused on Medicaid based on our information. Georgia indicates that it's maybe only for Medicaid, but it's not clear to us that it may also be commercial. In addition, other states are looking or doing things on a voluntary basis. I would point to Tennessee and the work that TennCare is doing on Medicaid is one example. And we also mentioned last time that Oregon attempted this, but is in the process of disbanding their system. That's my 2 minutes, and that's my report. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pratt. Okay, if everyone just give me 1 moment, and I will get us switched back over to the presentation. Make sure we're on the correct one. Okay. All right. Well, with the conclusion of our public comment period for this work group, I'm going to turn things over to our first set of presenters. That's Jared Taylor and Tiffany Long, both with Block Health. And you all should have the ability to mute and unmute yourselves. So if you're having trouble, just let me know, and I can do that for you inside of WebEx. And I'd also like to acknowledge that Eric Bodine has joined the call as well. I can see him as a pop-up in our list of panelists. So I just want to make a note that he is on the call as well. So Mr. Taylor and Ms. Long, whenever you're ready. Do you all want to advance your own slides, or do you want me to take care of that for you?
Whatever's easier. How would we advance them here?
So you just let me know which one of you wants to do the advancing, and I will give you presenter privileges, at which point you will have the ability to advance the slides. There's a little side menu that slides out on WebEx that gives you the ability to move the slides up and down.
Yeah, if you can give me access to it, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure, just 1 second, and I will get you switched over. Okay, so you should have presenter privileges now. So if you take your mouse all the way over to the far left-hand side of the screen, a skinny little white menu will pop out, and you should see in the middle of it a 06 with an arrow above it and below it.
Perfect. Okay.
And you just use those arrows to move the slides.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. Excited to talk a little bit about blockchain to really provide a better overview of what the technology can be used for in the credentialing space, the different parts of the technology. It's pretty robust, as well as some examples, and then what needs to change in order for blockchain to become more used in the credentialing space within healthcare. So today's agenda will really be just quick introduction of what Block Health does, what is blockchain, and then we'll go through the different pieces of blockchain and then give you some examples. So the goal for us today is to really provide the overview, present the use case, and really just to have hopefully blockchain be in the conversation, which we believe it is, for a potential solution, which is why we're all here today. Just myself, I'm the founder and CEO, and then Tiffany Long is our director of credentialing at Block Health. Quick introduction. So what we're doing at Block Health is we're building an ecosystem of healthcare services and solutions to power the future of healthcare. So what that means is we look at every use case of what healthcare professional credentialing can be used for, and then we data map it to the different types of services that it can be used for. So state licensing, enrollment, EEA, CSR registration, all your renewals, and we're continually adding more services to our platform. We start with the key credentialing information because of how much information is collected from the healthcare professional. And then we allow the healthcare professional to own their data and use it for what they would like. So they can set their access controls, they can share it with whomever they would like to make life easier for both them and the organizations. So we allow them to essentially use their data for more. They can store their credentialing and licensing documents in what we call BlockDoc, and they can access our Smart Universal Common App, which we call Block App, which is basically all of the state uniform credentialing applications, state licensing applications, medical malpractice applications, pretty much every application that uses credentialing data combined into one giant application that has smart logic throughout it, so you're only seeing questions that are relevant to your specialty, where you're at in your career, and so on.
So, sorry, I forgot it was my turn, Jarrett. Quick question, what is blockchain? That's kind of where you want to start. And blockchain, basically you can think of it as a distributed ledger, kind of like you would with, your checkbook. For those of us that still maintain and actually reconcile our checkbooks at the end of the month, you have that ledger where you are tracking money in and you're tracking money out. And a distributed ledger is obviously shared amongst more than one parties, and it doesn't have to be moneyed. You can also track information on this ledger. So much like you would on a checkbook ledger, you could see where information went, who supplied it, what the information was, and that's immutable, meaning not one person can make a change to that ledger without it breaking the chain or without someone else being notified. So it creates a really secure way of sharing information amongst multiple parties, amongst different nodes in the network. And those nodes in the network can include hospitals, state licensing boards. It can include, practices, maybe malpractice insurers. The possibilities and who can be a node on this network are pretty much limitless. And so you start thinking about the information that can be shared to this distributed ledger of an individual. And in my mind, how I think we will eventually get, down the road, not today, but you'll probably be given your digital wallet at birth. And in your distributed ledger, the first entry will be Tiffany is born and she's is given a birth certificate, and instead of us being issued, perhaps paper certificates, it will now be an entry in my distributed ledger that I can take with me and share as I then go to school, go to elementary school, high school, college. All of this information, it's static information. It doesn't change. Could then be entered into that distributed ledger, and I can share it as I continue to move through my personal and professional life. To that point, though, different nodes will have different access points to the ledger, meaning if we are doing credentialing, I wouldn't have necessarily shared the details of my professional or my personal information on that distributed ledger, but a credentialing person would certainly have access to the professional portions of that distributed ledger. So there is a way to control the access to who gets what. Anything you want to add about the ledger, Jarrett, before we go to the next slide?
Yeah, I would just like to say in situations where they request like your elementary school information, right? As Tiffany mentioned, being able to start at the most earliest point would really allow the opportunity to cut down on fraud altogether. And then it would also allow you to keep track of your whole life, your whole work history with ease. I wish it was the case where we had a distributed ledger to store birth certificates on. I ended up losing mine, so now I have to go back and get a copy, and obviously that's the time I don't want to spend on that task. But no, we can go on to the next slide.
I kind of talked about this already a little bit. I got ahead of myself. My apologies. But basically, the types of information that you could store in your digital wallet, it's really well suited for information that is static. Obviously, once you store it on there, there would be a forever reference to that particular item, like education, that doesn't change over time, past work history, hospital affiliations are a really good one. Especially all of these static type informations that wouldn't change anyway could be stored in an immutable way in the ledger for the network nodes to be able to reference and add to. And network node is basically a participant in that network, meaning Dr. Jones has shared his information with Joe Ellen at Anthem and the Board of Medicine. All of us then that had been given the proper permissions could pull information that we need. And that becomes super helpful when a physician or a nurse practitioner or whatever the profession might be is changing jobs or looking for additional hospital affiliations or new payers that they want to be enrolled with or a new license. It becomes a whole lot easier for everyone involved, especially the professional, if they have this distributed ledger where everything could be stored. And not every state license board is then asking Virginia, can you send us a verification over of the license they had in Virginia? And, by the way, we want all of their hospital affiliations, and everybody's kind of getting that same information over and over. And we've definitely made strides in credentialing to kind of centralize some of these processes, but now we have kind of centralized silos still of information. So we haven't completely found a way for everyone to share, and I think that this would probably be the best way for us to do that so that the information is there for everyone that has those permissions. And I've referenced this before. You can't just change a block in the blockchain. If you do attempt to change a block, it does break it, which means that nothing can be added to that chain. So it has to be kind of reconciled and agreed upon so that that can be fixed before we can carry on with the blockchain. So really start reducing, if not eliminating, the possibility of fraud and someone attempting to present credentials that don't really belong to them. This becomes really, really difficult thing to do.
So there's two primary types of blockchain. Public and private. And there's a lot of hate towards private blockchains, especially as of late, because many believers feel that it's not a true blockchain. It's basically just a more advanced database because of its private structure. So when we really think of blockchain technology, we usually think of public blockchains as like the primary type. And two examples of that are, which I'm sure a lot of you, even if you're not super close to the industry, have heard of, are Ethereum and Bitcoin. If you haven't heard of Ethereum, you've definitely heard of Bitcoin. And a few of the advantages, or I guess describers of public, decentralized, distributed, it's open, and anyone has the ability to read, write, or participate. So that's probably one of the biggest differences. And it's immutable, meaning data is verified once, it cannot be altered, it's there forever. Whereas private is not decentralized, it's governed by a single entity. You have to receive permission to read, write, participate, or even audit the information in there. Data is not public, and it is typically at a lower cost as a result, because you can control who's in the network and which nodes are verifying the transactions. And it's typically easier to scale as a result, or at least that's been the belief to date. And two examples of that are Ripple and Hyperledger. Hyperledger's pretty well heard of because their affiliation to IBM. And as far as the stigma around a public blockchain, well, public, so the information is out there for everyone to see, right? Well, not really. So if you don't have all the pieces to the puzzle, it doesn't matter. It's a public transaction that you won't be able to decipher. So information that's included in a public blockchain transaction, the key pieces at least, are the transaction hash, the status, the block, timestamp, and then from the to the transaction fee, which I'll go into right now. So for the transaction information, the hash is a unique identifier. Think of it as a reference number that's attached to a transaction. So if if a primary source verification occurs for, let's say, a state license, New Hampshire, it's assigned a unique, once that transaction goes through, it's assigned a unique transaction hash. That's the reference number. So if you want to see if that license was verified, you could enter in a website like Block Explorer or Etherscan, one of those type of websites, where you could enter in the reference number and determine if it was verified. But when you get there, you're going to see all this other information, right? And you're not going to understand, well, who verified this document? When was it verified? So the status will tell you if the verification succeeded or the transaction succeeded. The block will give you the block number that the transaction was included in, which Tiffany talked a little bit about the block structure. As far as my favorite part of this transaction information, it's the timestamp. It's basically down to the second. So it gives you the exact date, time that the block was mined, which is when it was verified by the network, which is one of the big advantages of blockchain. And then it gives you the from and the to, which highlights the account that so that basically the from is the sender, the to is the receiver, and the transaction fee, which is the amount of Ether paid to the miner for processing the transaction. So Ether is basically the currency. And I used an example from Ethereum, one of the public blockchains. Sorry. Tiffany, you want to mute your mic?
Oh, I'm unmuted. But I think I cut out, so if you said something, I didn't hear the last couple words. I'm sorry.
I want to mute your mic.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. So this is an example of a public Ethereum transaction. So this is what you see. So when someone says it's public, unless you have all the pieces of the puzzle, like that the transaction ID is attached to a certain document, the from address is a certain facility or state license board or university, and the to is a particular healthcare professional, this information means nothing to you. So the negativity towards a public blockchain saying that the information is public, it's really not. Everyone can access it, but not everyone will know what is going on. So a few pros and cons of the of this technology. So one of the coolest parts of it is that, I think we alluded to it earlier, the professional gets to own their data. Now, there's obviously some cons to that too. We'll go into those, but there's full transparency of the data. It basically gives you a single source of truth where you can trust the information on the system. The ability to scale is easier, and obviously in the private blockchain structure, but we're getting better with public with new tools. It's decentralized, it reduces duplication, it increases accuracy of the data, and it's able to cut costs and reduce overhead. And perhaps one of the biggest other pros of the technology is that in a time of like a natural disaster, if the information is already verified, you can go and reference that, see that it was verified by the primary source, and actually be able to get the information that you need without needing to wait to hear back from a certain facility. Some of the cons, it can use a lot of energy. Public blockchains can typically use a lot of energy because the computing power to mine a transaction is relatively high cost. Now they're working to scale that, and you'll see that I also put as a con, even though I put it as a pro as well. Scalability can be difficult. It really depends on the blockchain that you're using, but there have been instances where it is difficult to scale the blockchain. Can be complex. There's a learning curve. People within an organization are still scratching their heads, even though the technology came into really full effect in 2017, is when everyone started hearing about it. And letting your healthcare professionals own their data can come with more complexities, right? Like, are they going to update it on time? Are they going to make sure that it stays updated at all? And it can be expensive, right? Immutability doesn't come cheap. Forever means there's going to be a cost to keep it there forever. So why blockchain and credentialing? It's been a debate for a couple of years now. Again, really since 2017 is when you've started hearing the chatter about, well, maybe we should start using blockchain technology and medical credentialing amongst some other industries. They've also discussed it being used in patient data. There's obviously much more personal information within patient data, so it hasn't been used to the full effect. But basically, data stored on thousands of servers, which allows it to be accessed pretty much instantaneously by anyone in the network. Data entered cannot be erased. So if someone was trying to be fraudulent, had a license banned, you'd be able to always see that that transaction took place, even if there was the ability to remove some of the negativities around a certain healthcare professional. Now, the healthcare professionals might not always like that, but the organizations and that need to be able to verify the information and view it, they'll like the fact that they get a full picture of the healthcare professional without anything being able to get erased. It's nearly impossible to hack. So in order to hack a blockchain network, you basically need control of almost every computer in the network that's verifying the transactions. And you need to access them at the same time while trying to crack the highest levels of security, which it's nearly impossible. And you have the ability to access current data even if the facility closes or a natural disaster occurs, which brings us into our next thing, and I'll kick it over to Tiffany. Oh, looks like the slide got messed up.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. I can still talk to it. This is probably one of my favorite examples of how blockchain can be super helpful in credentialing. And the example I like to use is I was still working in the hospital when Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans. And I was unfortunately, in the middle of credentialing a pediatric urologist that was coming from New Orleans right when the hurricane hit. And we desperately needed his services. He was trying to leave the area, and I was tasked with obtaining verification of education, training, his licensure, and he had done everything in New Orleans. So the problem was I was not able at that time to get verification of anything. I had to rely a lot on secondary sources, word of mouth, trying to put the piece of the puzzle together. The AMA was available, but it wasn't correct. So that was an issue. I couldn't rely on that particular source for education and training. So it was a really difficult time because, everybody was kind of dealing with what they had going on in New Orleans, and we couldn't get him working fast enough to see our patients. But if we had a situation where those types of static records were saved onto the blockchain, I could have easily pulled all of his information, got him working, within days versus weeks. Another situation is, Hahnemann University closing. And so then the question becomes, okay, how now are we going to verify affiliation letters? Are they going to have a Forevermore letter? How do I access it? Are they going to put it on maybe NAMS Pass or something like that? Is it going to be accurate? There's no checks and balances when you use that. What about malpractice history? How are we going to be able to get those, pending claim documents, work history? All of these pieces of information very well may be available, but you're going to have to go to different sources to obtain them, and you're going to have to look for them versus having one centralized source that houses all of that information in an immutable fashion. And so that's, for me, the biggest selling piece of blockchain is that everybody has access to the same records when you're in that network node, and it's a more robust, more complete picture. And to that point, I can't now leave something off of my application or off of my record intentionally or unintentionally. Maybe, sometimes I have seen this where a provider has privileges at 2 hospitals and, the time overlaps. And so if I had an okay record at one, I might put that one on my application, but maybe I won't put the other one because the time gap's covered, and I don't really want to talk about what happened to that hospital. And those sorts of things become nearly impossible to do when we get to a stage where blockchain is widely used and accepted. I don't really have anything else to add to that slide unless you do, Jarrett.
No. I'll move on. So we wanted to give a quick snapshot of how blockchain can be used. We've talked a little bit about, obviously, the technology and the use case, but what does a potential process look like? And I simplified this for the most part. I didn't want to go too robust, but basically when you're onboarding a healthcare professional, they're uploading, entering key information to the blockchain. So they're supplying or identifying information, education history, medical licenses, etc. The primary sources then have the ability to verify the information uploaded to the blockchain. So they can go through, verify education history, medical licenses, work history, and then once their verifications go through, the healthcare organizations have the ability to check the information on the blockchain following primary source verification. So if the information is actually deemed accurate by the healthcare organization following primary source verification and up to date, then a decision, a letter, a note is uploaded to the blockchain stating that this information is accurate and up to date. Everyone that has the pieces of the puzzle can decipher the transaction, right? The transaction ID attached to each piece of information, the to and the from, like who is the sender, who is the receiver, and be able to paint a picture that this information was verified actually by the primary source on this date at this time, 10 days ago, 20 days ago, 100 days ago, to the second. And the continuation of that process going into payer credentialing, again, simplified, is we continue from that healthcare professional credentialing process. An enrollment application is then sent to payers if the healthcare professional is accepted. So then the healthcare professional's data in the blockchain is verified by the payers using primary source verification. And then same thing as before, that information is verified as accurate, up to date, and the decision is uploaded to the blockchain. Everyone has the pieces of the puzzle that can decipher the transaction. And actually, this is still obviously in the earliest stages, but patients will be able to go onto a Block Explorer page and be able to look up if their provider is enrolled with a certain payer. But I'll go into this in just a second, but one of the issues is there's a few things that need to happen for this to be the case. And one of the biggest things that I point to is a better user interface and experience for both the patients, professionals, payers, healthcare organizations. Blockchain is still a little bit ugly on the surface. The technology, the underlying technology is very superior, and it is, I do believe it's the future, but the user interface and experience behind blockchain needs to really look a lot better. Larger healthcare organizations need to support it. We always say if you don't have a large healthcare organization, like a well-known health system, come on board and back the technology, then you're not going to get very far with the technology, whether it's superior or not. More investment into the technology, particularly in this space, and then pushback from industry incumbents, right? There's some parts of this that if blockchain succeeds, will actually limit certain industry tools that we would use to verify information in the past. And, there's some pushback currently on that today. That's really it. Thank you for allowing us to speak on this topic.
All right, thank you so much. And I would like to open up the discussion to any questions from the work group members. So you should have, like I said, the ability to mute and unmute yourself. So if you are having difficulty, please just let me know using the chat function, and I will assist you getting yourselves muted and unmuted, okay? So, any questions for Mr. Taylor or Ms. Long?
Hi, this is Barbara Allison Diane. Who do you have using this now, and kind of what are their thoughts? I mean, practically, what's happening in your space? What's the biggest group you've got going?
Hi, thanks for your question. So we have built the technology. We use the technology in-house. We have not let anyone outside of the organization use the technology. So as far as like other parts of our platform, we work with telehealth companies, we work with clinics, but the blockchain piece of our platform, we have not allowed anyone besides us being a credentialing verification organization to use it. So we are continuously testing it. We have had conversations with Mount Sinai, Cleveland Clinic, Unity Point Health System, CHS to partner, and we are still having those discussions. But until we get one of those big, we are not going to invest further until we get a large health system to sign on board.
And this is Barbara again, if I may. In your model, you talk about members a little bit like members having access. Who's bearing the brunt of the cost? Is it the practitioner that's putting their data in initially? Is it the health system that's going to partner with you? How are you looking at cost sharing?
So in our model, we try to share the cost across the healthcare professional and the hiring organization. Now, that's a relatively new model because, as a lot of people will point out, right, the healthcare professionals aren't known for paying for a service like that. But because of the time savings and the ability and the major pain point of credentialing, it's been something a lot of the professionals that we've discussed and have on the platform have been open to and are willing to pay. We've already factored that into our costs.
All right. Actually, on the subject of cost, this is Rebecca Allen. I when you were going through the what is displayed on the transaction when you look it up, one of the things you had in there was the amount of, in your example, Ether that had been paid to the miner to do the verification of that. And when it comes to paying those miners for doing the work to validate all that information, I understand they're getting paid in, well, in that example, Ether or Bitcoin or whatever blockchain monies we're talking about. But who is actually doing the paying? I'm curious if, let's say hypothetically the state were to build or buy such a system that had blockchain as part of it, and Ether's being paid out. Who's paying it? I assume the state in that example, but like, what are the tax implications? Because money's being distributed. Does it count as income? Like, how exactly does that work?
So in our particular model, we pay those costs. We just factor the cost. So we do an analysis, right, of how many transactions are expected by an organization, like how many verifications are they going to need in a certain year, and then we factor that into our pricing. And the price to include a document or a transaction on the blockchain can range from a few cents to a few dollars, which is why in many cases for any large files, because you pay by file size, it's suggested that you attach just the transaction ID onto the blockchain transaction, and you don't actually put the whole document on the onto the transaction. So what you're able to see is that as long as you have the transaction ID, you know that that is the document in question that was verified, but you just saved several cents on that transaction by only including the text. But yeah, we end up paying the blockchain costs, but we factor that into our costs. And this could work with, any other blockchain type solution out there. Usually how it works is the organization that's using the platform will pay those transaction costs as a result of whatever the company they're using is charging. It's all factored in though. Basically, we've come up with, for a basic like credentialing, full credentialing file on a professional, it's right around, this has changed, but I think, and Tiffany, let me know if this is incorrect at this point, but I thought we had around $50 for how much it costs to have a full like credentialing file on a healthcare professional in the system. And that cost is getting lower as the blockchain scales, but that's what we were looking at today.
Yeah, just to add to that, that's the model that we use, but we've definitely seen other types of pricing models and ways of sharing costs depending, on what your specific situation is. I like to say that all of the rules of engagement, if you will, for blockchain haven't exactly shaken out yet. As more and more entities use it, those rules become more clear. So it's almost like forging your own way. So if a different fee model maybe fit better, there's different ways you could handle that at this point, I feel like.
All right, thank you for that. I guess thank you for that explanation, but I still have a question as to I know you say, let's say $50 per file to verify your standard file that's not got any strange irregularities or anything like that about it. But there's someone or someones out there who are verifying the individual transactions in this ledger that the healthcare professional has put in as like, these things have happened. I got my license on this date. I graduated from whatever university on X date. In the transaction snapshot that you had shown, that person's getting paid something. And I guess my question is in the model that we're talking about, is that Block Health would be paying that person some amount of Ether or Bitcoin.
Not everyone, because of the blockchain technology, right, hasn't joined together and say we will now do all this for free, right? It's
right.
Those costs still exist. They just so they get paid in that case by our organization. It's factored into what we charge an organization.
Right.
But in many cases, that cost is more shared than it looks because so many people benefit from a complete file on the blockchain. More so than just that one organization. The other organizations after them also benefit from it.
Right. I'm just thinking of in terms of like if the state, in this instance, the Commonwealth of Virginia, were the one, either they developed it or they had bought it themselves. They bought some system that does this through blockchain. Then there's some payment that's going out the door, however small it might be, to individual miners. And like I'm just trying to envision what obligations the state would have come tax time because I would imagine that's income to the miners. Like, does the state have an obligation to give them a 1099? Like that's where my brain's at right now, just in terms of what the state might owe in terms of tax paperwork to those folks who are doing to the mining part of it.
So the miners it's essentially just a network of computers. So you wouldn't have to pay them a 1099. Yeah, I mean, people own the computers, but the computers are basically doing are running the algorithms that are able to confirm the transaction. So you wouldn't have to pay a 1099. And then obviously any like the pricing structure, you would have the ability to kind of estimate exactly what the overall costs are going to be based on what you've seen in years past for verifying transactions, licenses. But yeah.
All right, excellent. And I did have an additional question. One of the later slides that you had shown was that the healthcare professional enters the information, so the graduation, the work history, et cetera. Then we go about getting it verified, and then once it's verified, it's immutable. It's in the blockchain, cannot be changed. If it's not verified, or the verification is refused or rejected, I guess I'm not exactly sure what the correct terminology is, that would show up in the blockchain as well, correct?
Yeah, I would say that this applicant was rejected, but it would have, there would be a reason associated with it. Like they were rejected because as we were going through, we deemed that they lied about their where they went to college or what they studied in college. So it really, as Tiffany mentioned earlier, right, you do not want to, you never wanted to lie before, but there were ways to get certain things removed from your record as it currently stands today. If it's on a blockchain, it's there. Like if you lied about something, even if you were able to make it right, I'm not saying you would, right? But you would still see that happened on this date at this time, and this organization called you out on it. Okay, so let's, sticking with the example, let's say you got something about your schooling wrong. So let's say you miskeyed it. You said you graduated 2001, and it's really 2002. You just hit the wrong number when you were typing it all in. Does the primary source, but otherwise it's accurate, does the primary source, in this case the university, have the opportunity to say, no, that's wrong, it's really 01, or is the answer just, no, that's wrong? No, they have the ability to correct it, but the original
key is wrong.
Mistake will still be there. But that won't be anything that, anyone says that, oh, you intentionally did this. That's an easy fix. It's more so like saying you went to Harvard when you never even went to college, right? That's the issue.
Okay. And then on the public versus private blockchains, I know you pointed out Hyperledger, which is an IBM product. If you have, let's say, I don't know that Arkansas does, but let's pick Arkansas. Let's say Arkansas uses Hyperledger for their primary source verification system that they have for physicians. And then South Carolina decides, oh, we want to have a system too, and we want to use blockchain, and we also want to use Hyperledger. Can those two separate Hyperledger systems talk to one another, or not at all, even though they're built on the same, in this case, IBM technology?
Yeah, so one of the reasons we chose, we use public blockchain, right? So in their cases, you can. They're working on cross-platform right now. It's a little easier with like Ethereum and Bitcoin, but they're trying to do it with some other platforms as well, because that was the big argument, right? Like, oh, wait, what if we decide today that we want to use Ethereum, but 5 years from now, we want to switch to Bitcoin. Like, are all our transactions gone? Or is it easy to transfer over? So there is the ability to do cross-platform, but they're still really working to make that more of a reality across different blockchains. But I believe for Ethereum and Bitcoin, that is the case today. I don't know about Hyperledger.
Okay. And then the a couple other questions. I do apologize for having so many. I know like I said, like the last two slides where you're talking about the health professional uploads and the verification begins. Can anyone, I know in the example you gave that, okay, the work history, et cetera, gets verified, then they get their credentials, they get privilege, and that gets added by the healthcare system in that case. Like they can add the information that this person got privileged at this hospital starting this date. Can others add additional information that are not the healthcare professional or, in this case, the health system to the record? So let's say your healthcare professional in this instance, perfectly honestly said, yes, I got my license from the Virginia Board of Medicine in 1997, and that is completely accurate, but they didn't deliberately miskey anything, but omitted information like they had gotten sanctioned by the Board of Medicine, let's say 3 years later. Does the Board of Medicine have the opportunity, because it wouldn't be a correction to an existing block that's in there, or a denial of verification from a block that's in there, would Board of Medicine be able to add something when they see that? Like, well, yeah, it's accurate, the guy got the license in 97, but also he didn't mention this sanction, and that needs to be added as a block.
Yeah.
Or as a transaction,
Yep.
Excuse me.
It would just get added to the chain.
Okay. And you said that could be individual, just a sentence, or it could be a whole document that gets added, either way. So it could be like the original sanctioning, or not the original, like a PDF of the sanctioning document.
And in that case, you would probably want to make the PDF available somewhere, whether it was through the website, like through however they want to make it available, or at least send a copy to the professional. But you wouldn't necessarily want to put, depending on the size of the document, the whole document on the chain. Rather, you would just put the transaction ID that is tagged to that document there and then reference it, because it would cut the cost down to cents.
Okay. All right. And if there's a break in the blockchain, someone did something wrong and it breaks it, this might be a very technical question. I do apologize. How, like broad stroke it, how does that get fixed so that the digital wallet can continue to be used even though there was a boo-boo and someone broke the chain?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. This would be a question I would relay to our CTO. But basically, you would have to re-verify a certain piece of information to start up the chain, because if there was a break, that would mean that there was some fraudulent activity or something was wrong, right, with what they were portraying. It wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be good for the chain to break. No one's asked me that question before, surprisingly. That would be something I would ask our CTO.
All right, thank you. So I do apologize for monopolizing your time on all this. Does anyone else in the work group have any questions? All right, hearing none, I would like to thank Jared and Tiffany so much for presenting to us about blockchain. I know we've had questions about it over the course of several work group meetings. And if anyone has questions that come to mind later on during this work group meeting, you're of course welcome to bring them up. But if they occur to you after the meeting has concluded, just send them to me and I will pass them along to our friends over at Block Health and see if we can get some answers. So thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time and doing this presentation for us.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
All right,
Thanks for
thank you.
having us.
All right, and I am going to reclaim the presenter privileges so that I can control the slide deck again. All right. Now, with our next presentation, let me see if I can get the presenter privileges back. Hang on. Yes, okay, excellent. As I mentioned during the agenda overview, this is going to be coming from VDH's own Office of Procurement and General Services, specifically Michael Capps, who is a management analyst over there. Michael, are you still on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Do you want me to give you presenter privileges so you can advance your own slides, or do you want me to handle that for you?
Yeah, I can do my slides if you want to give me the privileges.
Okay, 1 second. Let me get that switched over for you. Okay, you should have presenter privileges. So like I told Mr. Taylor, if you take your mouse and take it all the way over to the far left-hand side of the screen, a skinny little menu should pop out, and you should see a 22 in your case over to the side with arrows above and below it.
Yep.
All right, yeah, just use those arrows to advance the slides.
All right, so my name is Michael Capps. I'm working in Procurement and General Services for VDH. Just going to go over a very broad view of what an IT procurement would look like for the agency. There are certainly a lot more details to be hashed out in the process, but at this point, I think getting down in the weeds would maybe add a little bit of complexity that we don't need yet. So overall, the procurement is going to be governed by the Virginia Public Procurement Act, cited there, the Agency Procurement and Surplus Property Manual. VITA, the Virginia Information Technology Agency, has its own IT procurement manual that is going to be really your main source of information about something like this. And then VDH has its own procurement policies, which mostly applied to approval chains and management ownership over certain tasks. And then our Office of Information Management has its own IT procurement and development policies and procedures. I'm not sure if Rebecca's going to send this presentation out, but I do have links to some of that information here. And then I just couldn't link the VDH specific information because it's on our internet. So I'm just going to kind of go through the process of what initiating an IT project would look like, starting in our Office of Information Management, and then moving through the procurement process. So the first step, if VDH is the kind of lead owning agency over the technology, we would submit a project request, and this happens through VDH's internal intranet and server. We submit a request to OIM, pretty much just letting them know, you know, here's what we're trying to do. We've got these high-level business requirements. What is the goal of taking on this new software? Existence of custom off-the-shelf system through a vendor. So OIM is the one that makes the call on an in-house development or procurement, and they're going to take into account if we are aware of vendors who already own and sell softwares that do what we need them to do. That's going to be something that we let OIM know in this project request, and they're going to take that into account as far as, you know, relative cost and effort of developing their own if the software already exists somewhere else. There also is a kind of separate process called custom development with the vendor. So that's where once we go through the procurement process, we'll write a contract with the vendor, and then we develop the software from scratch with an external vendor, which there are a few more steps to that. It's a little bit more complicated. But again, we can get into those weeds if, you know, once we get there. And either way, if the cost is over $250,000, OIM has got to obtain approval and a project initiation approval from VITA. The larger technology procurements and developments, VITA just needs to be involved. I have heard occasionally when presented with a large project for approval, VITA will sometimes choose to take on the project to develop themselves. And that may particularly be the case when the software is going to involve multiple state agencies like this likely would, as well as some sort of public-facing user interface. But there's not necessarily a formula to that, and we wouldn't know until we got the request in front of them if that's something they wanted to take on. So if OIM indicates that we are going to be, they would like us to procure the software instead of developing it, the first step in that process is getting a request for approval to purchase, a RAP form, through the chain of approval. So one business unit or office is going to take ownership of the project, and they will submit a RAP, which is going to indicate how much money we're spending, what is the scope of work, and this is where we start to kind of build a little more specific information about what we're looking for from a software. And we indicate the projected procurement method, which there are a few, which I'll go over in the next slide. And this is something that is submitted through our shared business services unit. They have a portal for these types of transactions called Stellar. So that's the portal that DDH will use to get that moving. The different options we have, the first one and probably the quickest one is if there's an existing state contract through VITA with a technology vendor. If there is a contract, we think that we could essentially extend and write a new transaction from. That's the quickest. That usually means the vendor has already been through a lot of the security and other review hoops from VITA. And it just kind of depends. That's usually something that OIM is going to consider during their project review. If they're aware of a state contract that they think the project would fit into, that may be a quicker option for them to go ahead and punt that project to a procurement. Another one is called a quick quote. It's under $100,000. It's simpler of a procurement process. I'm imagining that that is not going to be the case here, so I won't get into it. But for the other procurements, you start with a request for proposal. And so we put that'll be put together by the business unit who's owning the process, as well as procurement staff in my office. It is managed mainly by my office and our procurement director. It has to be out for a minimum of 10 days. But after that 10-day, the owner of the RFP can kind of decide how long they want the RFP to be out. Usually, we see that IT RFP lasts a little bit longer just because there's a lot more information that goes into putting a quote and a proposal together for an IT procurement. So just giving vendors more time to do that. Additionally, there are some other levels of review that need to go into the RFP process before it gets posted, and that's depending on the dollar amount of the procurement or the expected and approved dollar amount. So if it's over $1 million, Dr. Oliver or the commissioner of the Department of Health at that time will have to review the RFP before it can get posted. And if it's over $5 million, it's noted as a high-risk contract. And then the Attorney General's office also has to review the contract contract, and that all happens before the RFP can even be posted. And those are all, every step of review is obviously going to lengthen the process. And certainly once it gets to that high-risk contract level, you're going to be adding some significant time to the process. So that's just something to think about when when we're recommending how much money to spend with something like this. I'm not sure if any of our groups that we've working with have mentioned about how much this costs to agencies. So then once we've gotten the RFP posted, it's closed, we start reviewing the proposals, which is a bit of a mix of OPGS, my office, the Office of Information Management, and the business unit who owns the RFP. And then when we are custom developing a new software with a vendor, there is a vendor selection committee through OIM that will actually make those selections, and they have several layers of review that go into that process. Again, something that just makes it a little bit longer versus buying one of the custom off-the-shelf systems. Like if we were buying Microsoft Office from Microsoft, that's a custom off-the-shelf versus working with Microsoft to develop a completely new software for VDH. Vendor selection and review. Other than those really high dollar contracts that have a lot of review on the front end, this is probably going to be the longest step in the process. OIM is heavily involved in reviewing the tech aspects of the proposals. I believe one of our analysts from OIM is giving a presentation at the next meeting, so she will have some more insight into that actual IT aspect of the process. But the main review layer that has given our IT vendors and procurement processes the most stress and certainly has lengthened them is the VITA Enterprise Cloud Oversight Services Review. This is for cloud-based technologies, which, I mean, certainly a lot of technology is these days. And even if any portion of the technology is going to be cloud-based, you kind of have to bump over into this level of review. From talking to some of our buyers and people who've worked in IT procurement, it seems like VITA's requirements for our security check are more stringent than other states. We've had a few procurements that have ended up falling through after months and months and months of review because the vendor just couldn't meet the security requirements from VITA. But that's just a case-by-case basis with the vendors. But once a selected vendor has passed all levels of OIM and VITA review, the contract will be issued. Again, if it's over $250,000, VITA has to issue a project initiation approval to actually issue that contract. And then, like I mentioned before, over $1 million is commissioner approval, and then over $5 million is OAG approval. So a time comparison for procurement versus development. It's honestly a little difficult to project that might be the case. The procurement versus development, at the end of the day, is a decision that's made by OIM. It's based on what funding we've been approved for and is available, the scheduling needs and mandates for the technology, and the staffing of the office as well. It could be as little as a few months or up to a few years. They may say that they want to develop the technology, but they can't get to it for another year or two. Right now, it seems like OIM is probably unlikely to take on an internal development, so they would probably recommend procurement of the technology. But again, our analysts from OIM may have a little more insight into that. Procurement can be a long process, especially for IT, and especially for large, high-dollar procurements. So the biggest time saver that we can really achieve is making sure that any vendors who are coming and submitting proposals to an RFP are fully aware of all of the VITA and the ECOS requirements. The solicitation itself is going to include those specific requirements and all other general terms and conditions that a vendor has to comply with to be able to be eligible for a contract. But just making sure that there's heavy communication up front before they respond to an RFP, that they are trying to check those boxes. That's going to be the quickest thing. A lot of those levels of review are out of VDH's hands and out of procurement staff hands, and are kind of punted around to different parts of the agency as well as to VITA, which is a separate agency. And that is pretty much all I have. Like I said, I was just wanting to give a pretty basic, broad overview of the process. So if anyone has any questions, I can do my best to answer them or take it back to our procurement director to get some information.
All right, does anyone have any questions? All right, I apologize, Michael. I do have a question, though I feel it's probably one that's going to be taken back to OPGS for follow-up, or alternatively, it might need to go to OIM as well, because I know Milam Lee, who is with OIM, is also on the line. In the process that you've explained, the procurement versus development decision is one that gets handed to the agency, in this case, VDH. And then within VDH, the decision is made whether to procure or to develop. Have there been any instances that you or your office or that OIM knows of where the General Assembly directed an agency to specifically procure or to specifically develop a system, or has it been the trend in the past that whenever IT systems are being procured or developed, that the discretion is just left to the agency to exercise its best judgment and the judgment of its subject matter experts as to which is the most appropriate path to choose?
That is a good question. You know, I'm not specifically aware of a time when the General Assembly has mandated something that's specific onto the agency. Obviously they could, and certainly if something like that is tied to any sort of allocation of funds and is included in the budget language, there's nothing that I know of, you know, to prevent something like that happening. You know, if there were a strong recommendation from this work group to instruct the General Assembly to maybe put a mandate like that into play. But from my understanding, it's mostly been left up to the discretion of the agency.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Michael? Okay. Milam Lee, are you still on the line?
Yes, I'm still on the line.
Okay. As a reminder to everyone, Milam is with the Office of Information Management. That was the individual that Michael was referencing throughout the call. I think it would be helpful, now that Michael's given us the OPGS view of how procurement goes, I think it would be helpful for the next work group meeting to hear from OIM about what factors go into the decision to do the development of a system in-house. Would you be willing to look into that for us?
Sure, absolutely.
All right, excellent. And then I know I know Eric was originally on the call, Eric Bodine, who's with our, also with the Office of Licensure and Certification, who is the division director for the Certificate of Public Need program. Eric, are you still on the line?
Yeah, I'm still here.
All right. I know that the mandate from the General Assembly was the development or procurement of a system. And I know we being VDH and specifically OLC, do tend to use a lot of data coming from VHI, which is the Virginia Health Information nonprofit. That's a completely private nonprofit that's mandated through code that we work with, correct?
That's correct.
And I don't know if you have any information on that, but when that directive was set up for the Department of Health to work with a nonprofit for health data reporting, if that was a procurement sort of scenario. Do you recall, or do you have any information about that?
I would suspect it was a procurement, but that predates even me, so I don't know.
All right, excellent. Well, I wanted to ask, because I know VHI's data is not only, of course, utilized by the Department of Health in our Division of Certificate of Public Need, but is also utilized by private individuals and organizations as well. So that might be a potential avenue to look at for a type of procurement. But I'll do some further digging on that particular point to see if exactly how that was handled, because that, correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, that'd be a little different from sort of the procurement timeline you set up here, because this procurement presentation was specifically about if the agency itself goes out and buys the system, rather than contracting with a nonprofit, which then, in the example of VHI, which then sets up its own IT systems to accomplish the task, correct?
Yes and no. If you end up sending these out, or for your own reference, the two little PDF icons at the bottom of this slide, one of them is a pretty in-depth swim lane chart that OIM has put together for custom development with vendors. So the situation that you just described, we contract with the vendor and then with them build a new system to accomplish whatever task it is. That is kind of included in this whole procurement process. A lot of the main players there are the business office that owns the project, OIM, and the vendor to work out a lot of the tech requirement issues. And then it just kind of follows from a purely like business procurement standpoint. We're waiting for some cues from OIM, but follows still that main procurement process.
Okay. And this is a question for Mila. Correct me if I'm wrong, VHI's agreement with the Department of Health, that's presently, quote unquote, owned by OIM, right? That particular management of that particular relationship?
Correct.
All right. Then I'll definitely follow up with you offline about not only the general OIM presentation for next meeting, but also about some specifics in regards to the VHI model, if that's all right. All right. Well, I, again, would like to thank Michael for taking the time to outline the procurement process for us, since one of the mandates of this work group is to make recommendations about potential procurement versus potential development in-house of a system. So thank you, Michael. And if anyone else has any questions, that would be the time to jump in. But again, same offer that I made following our Block Health presentation. If additional questions come to you after the meeting is over, just let me know and I will pass them along to Michael, and he and the procurement experts at OPGS will get those answers for us, okay? All right, excellent. I'm going to retake the presentation or the presenter privileges, so just one moment. Okay, I should have the ability to advance now. Yes, okay. Discussion of next steps. So as I mentioned, we will have the Office of Information Management within VDH with Milam Lee presenting at our next meeting about how the development side of things would go if that were the decision to be made either internally, if the GA gave discretion to this agency to make that call, or if the GA directed the agency to do its own development, to have that in there. We'll also look at the VHI model of procurement as well. And then is there any other information or topics that this work group would like to investigate further before moving on into starting to nail down what the recommendations would be? Please feel free to mute, unmute yourselves. And again, if you're having any difficulty, just let me know in the chat and I will help you out as best I can. So the floor is open. Please let me know if there's other topics that you all would like to look at before we start nailing down what our recommendations are going to be.
This is Katie Page. Good morning. I'm representing the Virginia affiliate of the American College of Nurse Midwives. And I just want to, I know primarily right now we're talking as probably the lowest hanging fruit of any system focusing on Medicaid. I want to ensure that we keep in mind when we're thinking about who would be accessing the system or able to input information in the system, that we keep in mind that a lot of clinicians practice outside of institutions and maybe in private practice. And so thinking about ease and access for those clinicians is really critical and important.
All right, thank you, Ms. Page. Yes, and I think one of the things that this work group will need to take into consideration when it is coming up with its recommendations is the scope of what this system is going to look like. Is it going to be a right out the gate, try and accomplish as much as possible, the most provider types, the most providers that can, or not providers, the most payers who can take advantage of the centralized credentialing system? Or is it more of a tiered, stepped approach, sort of like what Arkansas has done, in which they started with just physicians, and then let's say later on it gets expanded to the nurses and et cetera, or maybe the North Carolina or Texas models where they have the system, but it's presently limited to Medicaid. So I think that is something that the scope of how big the project is and how we go about eating that. Do we take one giant bite or do we take smaller bites and do it incrementally? I think that is something that the work group should definitely keep in mind, and to make sure that it is as valuable as possible with also being as feasible as possible, so we don't end up in the situation that Oregon seems to have found itself in.
So, Rebecca, this is Barbara Allison Bryan. As I hear you talking about Oregon, who is now phasing out, and Arkansas, North Carolina, and Texas, do we have information from them of where they stub their toes? Do we have that information so that in our recommendations we could avoid where they stub their toes, or is that something that we should be looking at to talk to some of them, or are we not going that direction, or have we already and I just missed it?
So we have the information that the sort of high-level information that Mark Pratt and the folks at CAQH had presented both last time, and then what Mark had presented again during the public comment period. We haven't had any presentation or super in-depth discussion about that. So I will work with trying to, I will certainly put information together for the next meeting about that, but I will also do my best to try and get actual representatives from I'd certainly like to hear from Oregon and Arkansas, and then maybe one of the states that's doing the Medicaid model. I don't know necessarily that we need to hear from 4 separate states about that, but trying to get representatives from those particular states to come in and talk about their specific experiences so we can hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, rather than having it filtered through me, who obviously hasn't been in the trenches in that state doing the procurement or development of that. So yes, I do think that is something that can be delved into and should be delved into more. So I will work on getting that for our next work group meeting.
I appreciate it because all I knew was that high level stuff. I'm especially interested if we could get someone from Oregon.
Yes.
And if you want to divide and conquer and, I'll call some folks and you call some folks, just let me know. I'm happy to help.
All right. All right, that sounds great.
This is Kelly Cannon with VHHA. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. I guess it sounds like most of these states make sense. Started with Medicaid and maybe they plan to expand further, but I would just want to know what's going through my head is do we need any kind of commitment from the private sector in order to move forward with a procurement or a build of this kind of system? Specifically, I know we're focusing on MCO credentialing, but we've also dabbled in the hospital licensing and making sure that at least we have those components in place. So if at any point, I don't know that we would be able to get hospitals to commit to a program ahead of time, but I just wanted to think that through. Is it that if we start with Medicaid, the idea is that if the state mandates it, the MCOs need to go along?
All right, excellent. Yes, I'm taking notes. Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Rebecca, this is Doug. I think the challenge you have is that if you do small a bite, your cost is going to be pretty high for what you're getting, and it's not going to look real attractive. If you do too big a bite, you're boiling the ocean, a la Oregon, and you fall apart because it's too much. So, finding a happy medium is not an easy thing to do. The problem with Medicaid is the challenge of the cost versus the group participating. What ends up happening is, that everybody has to do the same function regardless of whether it's Medicaid or not. So making it Medicaid only doesn't really, help that much in the greater scheme of things. So I don't think that designation really gets you where you want to go in terms of, economies of scale and efficiency and improvement. And, if the economies of scale and efficiency and improvement aren't there, then, the question is, what are we doing?
Yes, I think it would be, on that point, I think it would be helpful to hear from one of the states that has presently a Medicaid-only program to see if their plan was only to make it Medicaid, or if their plan is to scale it up so that all payers can take advantage of it, and if it is, what they're looking at in terms of that scalability and the cost that goes along with it. I think that would be important to know, because if it's Medicaid only, then I don't necessarily think that would satisfy the mandate that the General Assembly has given to us, because it's a pretty wide one in terms of who is supposed to be able to rely on and be able to take advantage of this system. So I think limiting it to just Medicaid would not be a recommendation that meets that mandate. But again, I would want to hear from those states to see if it's a tiered approach, or they've done what they've done and they're not going any further.
Yeah, I guess the interesting thing is that, if you were going to do Medicaid only, then people would want to talk to Medicaid about doing it, not to VDH about doing it. In Arizona, for example, it's a private sector solution. Is really what they did was the Health Plan Association took over doing it. for all of the Medicaid health plans. And they hired a private vendor to do it on a contract, which is very similar to what we've been discussing, which is to hire a vendor who handles it so that everybody doesn't have to do it over and over and over again. That was the concept anyway. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, does anyone else have anything else they would like to add before we wrap up this meeting? Any other topics or information that they would like to be brought before the work group so they can feel a little bit more secure and comfortable as we move into the recommendation stage?
Hi, Rebecca. Sorry, this is Tim from MSV. I may have missed it earlier. Do you know what the name of Oregon's program that they are using is? I can always reach out to them directly.
I do not recall off the top of my head what that would be, but I'm not sure if I have it in my notes, but if I don't, I can definitely get a hold of that.
Okay, thank you.
I believe, and I could be wrong, I thought Oregon developed their own. I don't think theirs was a procurement, if I'm recalling the CAQH presentation correctly.
I can go back and look through it, but thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And certainly that information will be in our next work group meeting, since what other states are doing, have done, and what the pitfalls may have been is going to be a part of it. So that would be a part of it. But like I said, my recollection is that it was in-house, but I do not think it was a procurement. But I will make sure that that information is included. All right. All right. Well, not hearing anything else. Again, if you all have any questions that come to mind for our presenters today that didn't occur to you while the work group meeting was happening, totally fine. Just send them to me, and I will pass them along to our presenters to get some follow-up information. And if you have other topics that you would like to see brought before the work group, in addition to the ones that we've just talked about for our next work group meeting, please let me know so that we can get that incorporated in. And right now I am looking at doing a meeting in 2 weeks' time. I know last time around we were trying to schedule around the General Assembly's special session, which is still going on. It seems to have quieted down a little bit after the first week or 2 weeks rush of bills. So if there are specific GA or legislative conflicts that you are aware of that are coming up in 2 weeks' time, please let me know so I don't schedule on top of that. I don't want to. I don't want this work group to be an overwhelming inconvenience to anyone, and I know that many of us who are on this call have responsibilities related to the GA and various legislative initiatives. So like I said, I'm looking at sometime during the week of the 21st of September. So if you know of anything that's going to be a big problem, just let me know and I will do my best to schedule around that. So thank you everyone for your time. And again, thank you so much to our presenters for taking the time to put together the presentations, to present to us and to field our questions. So thank you everyone. And I hope you all have a good Wednesday. I hope you've had a great Labor Day. And I will hear from you all in 2 weeks. And I will also be sending out this presentation as well, just as an FYI.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one now.
You're welcome.